Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a great day, an even better week. Today, everyone, what we want to get into is a bit of a deep topic. Actually, I think this one is one where you're going to have to put your seatbelt on a little bit, and it's going to be titled Gatekeepers. I know, right? Your mind is probably spiraled off into many different directions when I said the word. Uh, if you look around culture in general, what do you see? You see systems. And while we have to have a level of uh, normalcy, right, order, right, we have to. There has to be a level of order, right. Uh, there's this transition that occurs. There's if I'm a person who's going to make choices that are good for me and they aren't going to infringe or be unhealthy for others, then you could essentially remove every law out there, right? You could remove every law. Maybe you'd have the guide have guidelines, right? Example would be driving on in America anyway, driving on the right side of the road, right? Stop signs, some essentials that are kind of must dos, right? So that we don't have chaos and confusion on the road. But those are some hard ones that are very safety oriented, right? And it isn't to say that there aren't others, but what happens is that when we over externalize our fear about these things, a fear about the what ifs or the control aspect, this is where we create bureaucracies, right? And that's just a layering of rules upon rules upon rules and laws upon laws upon laws. And oftentimes these come into play because somebody's internal wiring isn't aligned to be good for everyone else. So essentially, the group pays for the few who won't play kindly with everybody else, right? That's essentially how all of these things come into play, right? You wouldn't need stop signs if the assumption was that you come to a four-way that you have to stop, right? Or a T in the road, right? So, so all of this is built, and so what's happened, and you might think on from a very top level, well, we have to have all this in place and there has to be structure and we have to have accountability. True, absolutely. But ultimately, all of that starts within a person, right? A lot of the bureaucracies and rules and everything else. And let me be clear, I'm not denouncing, that we have structure and that there aren't some essential laws. I'm not saying that that's not applicable. But but I am stating a universal truth here. If your internal wiring is such that you're healthy, your behavior is healthy toward the external world you live in, those aren't needed. That's just a fact. It's just a fact, straight up fact. Now, when comes to handling things like information and processes at work where things have to go to in a certain sequence, okay, you start out with a process and then you refine it to such a level that uh, it becomes repeatable, documentable, right? Uh, but but becomes something that is so streamlined that it is almost innate, right? That's what you're shooting for. That's what you want. You want your sine wave and anything that's going on to be smooth as can be. When you got herky jerky sine waves, right? Perform well today, stink tomorrow. Well the next day, terrible the following day. And how many times have you heard business owners complain about how performance and they can't keep people and all that stuff? Meanwhile, they're also part of the problem too because they're yanking and banking their people around all over the place, right? So you have this cooperative effort of confusion, really, that what lends itself to building bureaucracy. Okay. Well, that isn't the point of the conversation. Today, we're talking about gatekeepers. And the reason why I prefaced all of that is that gatekeepers are those within systems who now exercise control, and they add a layer of their own bureaucracy and control and power over others, right? So in an organization, you might have departments or others who are it's too easy just to throw out treating people poorly, right? It may be they may have there may be favoritism going on. There may be all kinds of different ways in which they're handling different people. They aren't standardizing their approach. They're just toxic as all get out, and they're just doing this to create confusion, to create work for themselves. Essentially, it has nothing to do with producing a product or service for the customer. And it's not always functionals. It's not always going to be a functional. It could be the leader of an organization, and it could be anyone within the organization. It could be people salt and peppered throughout the organization. Now, at any level, there's going to be the potential for this. Leads, supervisors, managers, departments, site, division, corporate, all of it. And all leaders, functional or otherwise, filtered in and around that. Anywhere where there's a control, finance, right? Well, we have to get approval to buy the thing, to do the thing, right? There's another lever. Now, we might see these levers as an accountability element, but at the same time, decentralized, standardizing, hey, does this make sense? Does it meet the smell test, right? Can be handled at low levels, right? It doesn't have to be centralized. It can be decentralized decision making. And it's kind of funny, actually, that when some organizations want to see site level, flat organizational structures at the site, but yet they refer back to a pyramidal structure within the corporate head. So essentially, you have all these flat site organizational structures going back to a corporate centralized control base to get approvals and justifications and all this bureaucracy that mounts up. Meanwhile, there's a lag time and the customers aren't being served. Okay, that's the pragmatic element of it. On the human side of this thing, on the people side of this thing, is you see where this also breeds a level of gatekeeping. So now, not only has this been established and normalized within all of culture, right? So you see this at all levels. It could be a person who goes from the broader team and now they're a lead. And now they feel there's a feeling of power. So now they start to exercise their power. And what do you think comes through with that? It's one thing to be accountable and to lead a team and to be, provide resources and do the things that you need to do. It's another thing to exercise, excessive control over a team and or treat them in a way that is less than appropriate, right? Even if it's not inappropriate, there's a big chasm between inappropriate and ideal, right? And in the middle, you have a lot of folks exercising their own ego and pride and swinging the hammer. And this is where you see a lot of retribution and crazy stuff like that happening, right? What does this do? This also lends to your turnover. But you've also normalized this into culture over time. This didn't happen a day ago, a month ago, a year ago, a generation ago. This has been ongoing for a couple hundred years now. And when you create these this gatekeeping element, the power of leadership being highlighted over the support and the leadership element of leadership. Guidance, providing of resources, right, mentoring, developing. All of those things have taken a second place to power, dictatorial power. So you have all of this going to many people's heads, even if the power base is, one or two people underneath them in the organization that work for them. So what's dangerous here is we've created a culture now, organizational culture, but now look at the broader culture. Look at families. Families do this as well. So do civic organizations and communities. They're gatekeepers. You want to see a gatekeeping situation? The DMV. right? Almost all of the DMV could be automated, right? Just about every part of it. For an example, now, right? It couldn't always be that way. But the process has been arcane for quite a long time. And there's a gatekeeping aspect. Well, why? Well, we want to have control over this and that. And, it's just administratively uh, uh, pound into the ground. And and you could go throughout most communities and most things and find that we've created laws and gatekeeping things that basically are charging you administrative uh, a tag for something, right? Is essentially a doorway tax. What is a doorway tax? Well, it's socialism basically. But imagine I charge you to walk through that door over there. Well, I'm charging you to go through that door. Why you charge me to go through the door? Most people they don't have, well, I have to charge you to go through the door because we have to maintain the doorway. I have to have a security person stand by the door. See where this goes? Essentially, the justification is the bureaucracy itself. It really doesn't have a functional purpose except to fuel the bureaucracy. Okay. Now you can streamline the bureaucracy down, but the common element here is this gatekeeping thing that is lording power over people. So now I have to go through that door, but now the process has been slowed because of this whole thing of charging people to walk through that door. Now I have to wait. This is the example of the tolls, right? Tolls on roads, same idea. Now I've got to wait. Now what's happening? Now we're wasting time, right? If you're at an actual toll, your your vehicle is burning. For a culture who complains a lot about waste and pollution, think about it. Every time you have to put on your brakes, that's waste. So every time we have an unnecessary stoplight, stop sign, etc., that's waste being created, right? Now you might think, well, it generates work for the brake, production plants. You're always going to have a need for that. But you generate more waste when you create these artificial blockages, these gatekeeping mechanisms. And it wouldn't matter if it's a mechanism in place or if it's a person that represents that mechanism. Your bureaucracy is just staffing that mechanism now, right? So and then all they do is walk around in circles justifying why they need to have that mechanism. So rather than be improving upon the overall system. Now, at a certain level, you're going to have some structure. So we're not saying that all structure is, we're not we're not poo-pooing structure. But what we are saying is these layer upon layer of internal bureaucracy has bred gatekeepers, and now you have functionals, site leaders. It doesn't matter if they're engineers, production, HR, whoever it is. They all have a power base, and their power base is essentially set up to preserve itself. Right? It's distant from the customer. The customer, it doesn't see the long-term impact of the customer. So I'll use HR as an example. If HR, they're told by the leadership, hey, we need to figure out a way to control our costs. But in their head, they imbibe that, well, I need to cut 4 people, right? Well, then they arbitrarily go, hey, so and so, your department need to cut people, right? Now I'm just using this one example. Not everybody's not going to do this, but I'm just using an example that you can bite off on pretty easily, especially if you're a small group or a smaller company. You're going to have to cut. You're going to have to cut. Well, I can't cut because I got this, and I can't cut because I have this and that, whatever, and it's going to impact customers. That HR in this example doesn't care, right? They're not thinking about the customer. They were just told we need to cut costs. Rather than let the team come together to find ways to improve their effectiveness to effect the same cost savings that they wanted from the get-go. They just communicated cut individuals. They really meant we needed to save X, Y, Z dollars. Well, okay, let's go in and figure out how we can improve our process. If you have to say, hey, if we don't figure out a way to make ourselves more efficient, then we may have to cut. Better to pose that, as a situation. But Obviously, every organization is different, and you got to follow your models. But the point is that there's a disconnect. You see how in this example, the HR is a power broker, right? They're a gatekeeper. They don't really care about. They're not thinking about the customer. They're just a mechanism in between. In all actuality, you shouldn't even need an HR either. Your manager should be able to hire their own folks, right? Hire and train, and all the folks working for them are training elements. So, we obfuscate to safety as well, right? We don't need a safety team. We should all be safety, right? I mean, it's really kind of ignorant if you think about it, that we've created all of these departments in between, right? To gatekeep something that should be common sense. Now, it doesn't mean that we can just rely on common sense, but if you can read a sign, do you have to have a person to stand there to read the sign to you, right? So that's my example, right? Maybe in some instances it's a video, right, explaining a thing, whatever your training mechanism is. But the point is that we've created a gatekeeping element. An excessive level of gatekeeping has massively contributed to the overspend at organizations. So what am I telling organizations? You want to save a lot of money, find a way to remove the gatekeeping element and also tackle the human side of this as well. You got a lot of turnover? Well, have open discussions about gatekeeping and what abuse of power does to an organization, to the broader team, right? That when you're a leader, that's a responsibility. You go into the character and behavior expectations. And when I say foot stomp, I'm talking about a King Kong size foot stomp in the middle of, whatever town, and foot stomping these expectations. These should not even be casual whatsoever. Why is that? Because if you do that, you're more likely to assure that those things aren't done, and you're probably going to reduce your turnover by a few percentage points at least. So this gatekeeping obviously has a huge impact on organizations, the internal health, organizational health of the organizational culture. But this isn't just in organizations. This is in broader culture as well. It doesn't matter if you're in a community and we're talking about law enforcement and these sorts of things. Hey, we would probably have more people follow the laws if they knew what the laws were. But there's no requirement for people to go out and read the laws, right? They're just expected to know them until there is an infraction, and then they learn typically, unless it's something big, right? Then they kind of announce it. But if it isn't, I've seen, and I won't name the state, they didn't change their speed signs on their roads, right? On their 2-lane highways. We'll make this more specific. On their 2-lane highways for years, okay? And so they were pulling people over and giving them tickets, as they would normally, right? But what's the caveat? It's posted, right? Posted. But what's been on their books, what had been on their books, they may have changed it. This has been a few years back. But what had been on their books was a 10 mile an hour higher speed standard. They hadn't changed their signs. So they're making money and creating their gatekeeping, right? And creating revenue off of something that wasn't even technically a violation. But the technicality is it's posted, right? There you go. So within that parameter, they can do it. But you see where there's the disconnect between the enforcement, right? And not blaming law enforcement. Heck, the law enforcement maybe didn't even know that the laws of the state had changed, for all I know, right? I got to give them that out. I don't know. Maybe individually they didn't know. Maybe they weren't trained. See where this goes? That gatekeeping can also work in the reverse effect like this too, where if I omit information, then I allow a problem to process, right? So if I don't tell people on my team about a certain thing, then they start screwing stuff up, and then say HR gets all ticked off. And do you see how this creates a thing too? Now people may be forced to be let go because they violated something they were never even told about. Okay, so now granted, sharp organizations, hey, this is our deal. Sign here. You read this. You understand what our new policy is. Yeah, okay, got it. Whatever. But not everybody does that, right? But you can see where over enforcement, omission, see how this can play against people. And then you're affecting everybody's lives. You're not just affecting that organization and their customers, you're affecting people in the community, right? This can be in any group. This could be families, this could be your friends, civic organizations, your churches, same thing. Anywhere where there's a group and there's kind of a structure, this is what you have to look at. And then when you get into the subtle aspect of this, it's, oh, we're not legalists, but yet we're going to talk about people as if we're the judge and jury, right? This would be your general cultural behavior now, right? And then this also seeps into organizations too, where people aren't actually doing anything wrong, or regarding humanity, they're doing the best they can with what they've got, but yet people are potentially judging them and talking poorly about them and all those things, right? Besmirching their character and all these things, right? So you have that kind of gatekeeping that goes on all the time, and it's acceptable so much, to such an extent now, that most of culture, look at all your much of your social platforms are people, it's not as bad as it once was, because people are getting called out more and more, but it's pervasive, where people are doing this quite often, and they're sneaky and sly about it. So this gatekeeping, right? You can some social platforms, they will push down on messages they don't want to get out, or from people that they're basically rating them, and or you have to pay, right, to reach a broader audience. Well, what if your audience was already interested in your material? You see where this goes? It's a gatekeeping, and this gatekeeping has been institutionalized now, to where it isn't hard. Software companies with these social media platforms, now they can gatekeep what gets out, and when they gatekeep what gets out, that is subverting essentially the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, right? So this is the thing that we have to be cautious and careful about. Gatekeeping, and I'm just throwing this out there for those constitutional law professors. Is gatekeeping constitutional? Is it? Or is it a violation of the First Amendment? Something to think about. But when you're gatekeeping, right, besmirching people's character, treating people poorly in the organization or within groups and so forth, that's a slippery slope, because that's going to come back to haunt you, right? If you're a person who believes in, the it doesn't matter what faith you are, every faith has a version of this. I'm only saying this because it's common speak anymore. If a person that believes in karma or physics, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you're a person who believes in physics, then you know that if you're going out there and you're gatekeeping, that gatekeeping is going to come back to haunt you. Now, how has it haunted culture? Look at the turnover rates now, right? I touted a 70% effectiveness rate some months ago, which is accurate by the numbers they turned in, but they only turned in the available based on available time, or not total time, okay, not total capacity. And so when you look at capacity utilization, we're in the 30% range of being effective in the US. That is horrid. 30%. Can you imagine if somebody only did 30% of the job for you, right? If you paid full price and you only got 30% of the fuel you put in your vehicle, can you imagine? I mean, that would just, your head would spin, right? Your top would pop. I mean, you would just be like, what? right? You'd be on fire. This is this is what we're dealing with. It's so bad that even at the institutional level of reporting, that's even being gamed now, and that's being gate kept so that our effectiveness isn't truly understood and why. Now, if you now, and this checks, look at how inflation, rents, property, all of it has tripled. Why do you think it's tripled? Because the effectiveness has 30%. It's a third, right? So triple that. So they want full price, although that they're only being able to effect 30% effectiveness. That is unbelievable, but it's out there. This is the slap back, right? This is the snapback. Think of a slingshot or a bow, and you pull it back. But in this case, you let go of the bow and it smacks you right in the face. Just smacks you. It's super hard. Okay? This is what culture's dealing with. This is the bounce back, the slap back from gatekeeping and allowing bureaucracy to layer and layer until a point where it's just out of control. So how do we get it back into control? Well, first of all, you got to recognize gatekeeping, right? We can't run around like we're talking about in general today, but you can't run around just going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. You can do that to a level, but you have to be constructive, right? Better to tackle this at its source. Well, where's the best, where do we learn gatekeeping? We learn it at school, right? We treat the A students with respect, and we treat the D or below students with disrespect. What do you think the kind of people we're turning out? If I feel like I'm trying the best I can, I'm struggling in this particular area, but yet I'm treated poorly. What do you think that person's going to think about the grown world out there? That when I'm trying hard, even though in this area, that you're not going to encourage me to do better and to do all these things and take the high road in this. You're going to beat me down for it, and probably shaming me in class, right? There's a good start right there. Okay, there's a good start. Beyond that, right? You've got to brief your leads, up and coming leaders at every level, as well as your employees, that we just don't abuse power. We just don't abuse our position, right? You just can't do it. It's unacceptable. And ensure that your training curriculum and reinforces this, right? So that's another aspect. And from there, we just have to speak more about it, because this is also something that is, obviously it's in our private organizations, but it's within our government too. And we have to be able to, a lot of the problems we have all this sitting around talking about and talking about and talking about and talking about, because a gatekeeper after gatekeeper after gatekeeper, has it's their pile of power, right? Well, this is my pile of power, and they're very reluctant to be honest and open about the information that they're being asked. So you have hearings and you have all this stuff which should be readily accessible and available knowledge to anybody up the chain of command, so to speak, within the government. Okay. And if it's not, if you had to sit down with a hearing with your boss to explain, and then you're giving them the runaround, right? Here's the gatekeeping, right? This is the gatekeeping situation. So we have to be careful. Gatekeeping is not helping us, it's hurting us. The least amount of gatekeeping that you should ever accept should be safety related uh, and procedural to minimize, obviously damage to people, or which is safety, and then equipment and that sort of thing. Harm from that perspective, property damage. But beyond that, gatekeeping is just a power grab. It's a power grab, and we're teaching it to people early in their developing years and reinforcing it. Now, this spills over into families as well. Gatekeeping as well. You're part of the club, you're not part of the club, you're in the clique, you're out of the clique, that whole nonsense. This happens, this whole cliquey thing, which was played upon, even going through school. I remember high school. Remember, you had the whole, the athletes, and then you had the people who were the science science oriented. I'm not going to say the colloquialisms just to be kind, but all the things, right? You have the different groups, right? And when I was growing up, yeah, there was kind of a friendly rivalry. It was nothing too harsh. I'm sure somewhere there was probably some weirdisms, but for the most part, it was just kind of built up a little bit of thick skin, and nobody ever took it super seriously anyway, for the most part. But beyond that, when you start to institutionalize that whole thing, where it's you can be part of our group and all that nonsense, well, what are you doing? You're gatekeeping. It's social gatekeeping. It's social engineering. And the same people who are doing social engineering are the same people who don't want you to have free speech, or don't want you to be able to be an American with all the rights and privileges that offers you, right? So you have to be careful. Our entire culture has been built upon this gatekeeping approach, and we have to be very careful. And unpacking it and unwinding it will take a little bit of time, but again, it's only going to take time because people don't want to. People see their little pile of control as power, right? Well, if they don't have if they're not, if they're not powerful, or if they're not in that power base, then what happens? Oh, wow, their team thrives. Oh, and you find out that leader in that particular arena was holding their team back. So that's another thing that happens when leadership, say site leaders. I use that because that's the easy one to see. Site leaders in this example are not providing resources, or not trying to get resources that their team needs to provide products and service for the customer. They're holding back so that they can show that they're more effective with the usage of funds. Okay, well, it's fine to be effective and to be efficient and all those things. I'm all for that. But you can't starve out your team. You can't starve them out for what they need to build the things or provide the service, okay? So that you can show that saved XYZ to get you a big fat bonus, right? I'm all fine with a bonus and doing whatever you got to do for your team. Hopefully you're including your team in on that whole deal too. But what is not fine is starving out your team because you're not a leader that takes care of the customer. Essentially what you're doing is you're cutting off the customer. You're cutting the customer short, and you're starving your team's ability to do the job correctly, and so on and so forth. So this gatekeeping thing, man, it is such a just toxic thing, and we've normalized it to such a point. We've created a nomadic culture. Now, if people are irritated with the gatekeeping, people will just dismiss whoever they want. They'll just rotate 20% of their workforce out and in layoffs by the droves, and they don't care. They just they're just seeing people as a number. They're not seeing them as human beings that have an infinite level of ability to contribute in really productive and innovative and collaborative and really fun and cool ways. And that's really what we should be striving for. All right, folks, that's just a little snippet on gatekeeping. We could probably talk for 2 hours on gatekeeping. Hope you're having a great day. Make sure to hit the good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage folks. And when you do that, not only are we helping to transform culture for the better day by day, bit by bit, but we're also making ourselves better and improving as well on that same journey. All right, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.